folks. We are once again having a very short video about thesis statements in a literary analysis essay. So another step to this is adding evidence to the claim. You have, in a previous lesson, thought about your theme statement or your claim in your thesis, and now you need to figure out, well, how you're going to support that. So now what? The literary analysis essay requires evidence in order to prove your claim. For literary analysis, your primary source of evidence is the piece of literature that is being analyzed in the essay. The types of evidence you use to prove your claim or your interpretation of the piece's theme include literary elements such as character, plot, conflict, style, and point of view, as well as literary techniques such as irony, metaphor, simile, symbolism, repetition, etc. As a rule of thumb, you will need 2 to 3 strong pieces of evidence to support your claim. I'm asking for 3 pieces of evidence to support your claim, please. 3. It is always better to have more than one piece of evidence to convince anyone of anything. Think about it. Wouldn't an attorney need more than one piece of evidence to convince a jury that his client is not guilty? The same goes for the literary analysis essay. Thus, you should aim to provide 2 to 3 pieces, so 3 pieces of evidence in order to prove your claim is true. So, how do you go about selecting your evidence? Just as an attorney has to sift through the evidence and select the most convincing pieces, so DNA, fingerprints, eyewitness accounts, video, etc., you have to do the same thing. You have to sift through the evidence, which first requires gathering materials, which you have hopefully already done. Once you've gathered your materials, your elements and techniques, you can begin the process of selecting the strongest pieces of evidence. For the literary analysis essay, gathering your materials includes reviewing any class discussions, quizzes, writing, activities, projects. For us, it's lots of quotation analysis, as well as reading and maybe rereading the original piece of literature. While we are studying literature, we are gathering evidence, just like DNA, fingerprints, etc., to use in the essay. After gathering your evidence, how do you go about deciding which evidence to show the reader? Good question. It all starts with the claim. Using your selected claim from the previous lessons, you can then sift through the evidence and select the evidence that most effectively proves your claim. Your pieces of evidence should appear in the thesis statement, so before you ever start writing body paragraphs, you should have an idea of which pieces of evidence to use and how to use them. Remember that a fully developed thesis statement is the essay roadmap that tells you where to go in the body of the essay. This means that you must first consider possible evidence before drafting a thesis statement. In the mini lessons that follow, you will brainstorm possible evidence that you will use to prove your thematic claim. How do we add evidence to the claim? An example of this process for a literary analysis essay on Macbeth is below. So the piece of literature, Macbeth, our selected claim, is ambition leads to corruption. Possible evidence to select from. We've got characterization of Macbeth. Changes from the noble hero to a ruthless murderer due to ambition. There's more characterization of Lady Macbeth, who goes from corrupt to crazy. There's the plot. The main character goes from protecting his country to betraying his king due to ambition. We have conflict of appearances versus reality. There's symbolism. The bloody dagger symbolizes Macbeth's guilty conscience and his corruption. And we've also got dramatic irony. It shows appearances are not what they seem. Now, ask, if you were doing this for Macbeth, which pieces of evidence best communicates the claim ambition leads to corruption? So this is a good time to do a reflection, okay? Here it's in the form of a paragraph, but it can be as a web, it can be as a table or a chart, it can be as jot notes for you, but you have to do that reflecting, right? This is where you figure out where or how that evidence really proves your case. You are, again, being that investigator or that lawyer proving your ideas. So this reflection says, I see that the characterization of Macbeth and the plot essentially communicate the same idea about ambition, so I can combine those two into one point. And since the same idea is repeated, that tells me that these ideas are definitely important and that I should definitely include them in my evidence. I see that the symbol of the dagger also repeats the same idea of Macbeth's change from a leader to corrupt dictator. Now, I know for sure that Shakespeare seems to be up to something about ambition and corruption because it keeps coming up. Since the idea is repeated yet again, I think I will definitely use that dagger. So, now that I have two pieces of evidence, the characterization of Macbeth and the symbol of the dagger, what about the other evidence? The characterization of Lady Macbeth has more to do with insanity than just ambition, so I will take that one out because it will take my essay in another direction that I don't really want to go in this essay. I want to stay focused on ambition leads to corruption. And it seems like the conflict and the dramatic irony are more about appearances, which isn't focused in my claim, so I'll take those out too. Well, what am I left with? I'm left with two pieces of evidence that clearly communicate my claim: the characterization of Macbeth and the symbol of the dagger. Now I am ready to write a fully developed thesis statement. And I know you guys might be thinking, oh man, that's a lot of thinking, that's a lot of reflecting, that's a lot of work that we just did there. And yeah, you're right. It takes a lot of deep thinking to come up with a strong thesis statement. And this reflection is really where that thesis comes together. Okay, you can have a strong claim, but if you don't have the evidence to back it up, it doesn't matter how strong that claim is because you're not going to be able to prove what you're trying to say. This thought process can be internal, right? You don't necessarily need to write it down. I suggest that you do to sort of keep track of your thoughts. You don't need to, but this thought process does need to occur, okay? Sifting through, sorting through your evidence, thinking about how what you have written down or thought about already connects back to your claim, and finding evidence that only supports your claim so that you don't wander off, you don't lose focus, and you've got a really strong, really effective, persuasive, analytical text. Now you can brainstorm character evidence. You can brainstorm two essential conflicts in the piece of literature that we are analyzing to support your claim or theme statement. If you think you are good to go to make your own thesis after you've finished up with adding evidence to your claim in this part of the video, that's great. You don't need to worry about working through the next couple bits of this video. But for those of you who maybe are struggling and need some more help to figure out what the claim can be or your evidence can be for your claim, continue on. So for this page, in the spaces below, brainstorm two essential conflicts. So identify a piece of literature and your claim or theme statement that you developed in a previous video. Then we can have conflicts of man versus self and man versus society. So the connection, how does each conflict support or connect to your claim, and explain. You've got textual evidence, so find two quotations to support how each conflict supports your claim. Then reflection, so then we're sifting through our evidence. Which conflict do you think better proves your claim? Put a star beside it and explain your selection. And now we can do some brainstorming for literary techniques as evidence. So in the spaces provided below, brainstorm 3 literary techniques used in the piece of literature you are analyzing that supports your claim or thesis, or theme statement. I'm sorry, I keep saying thesis instead of theme. Select literary techniques from the following list. Note that not every piece of literature uses all of these techniques, and there are other literary techniques that may be used as well, but these are just some examples. So tone, irony, symbolism, simile, metaphor, personification, allusion, flashback or flash forward, motif, repetition, contrast, foreshadowing, plot twists, allegories, hyperbole, satire, or imagery. Identify the piece of literature here, your claim or theme statement, just as you did above. And then think about 3 literary techniques, finding quotations that contain each literary technique, and then explain how those support or connect to your claim. Do some reflecting. Which literary technique do you think best proves your claim? Put a star beside it and explain your selection. Thanks, guys. Hopefully that helps on crafting a strong thesis statement.